Hello everyone, and welcome to Season 7, Episode 38 of Pro Wrestling's Top 50. I'm your host, Travis McNeil, and today we continue our countdown of the top 50 matches in CHIKARA history with match number 13 on our list, which is a trios match between the Kings of Wrestling of Chris Hero, Claudio Castagnoli, and Arik and the Black T-shirt squad of Mike Quackenbush and Reckless Youth with their partner Jigsaw from the CHIKARA Aniversario Orange event held on May the 21st of 2005. This match, I feel, is a real hidden gem. It is incredibly forgotten about. It is from my favorite period in CHIKARA history, 2005, and it is classic Kings of Wrestling, trios wrestling at its best. The story here, we talked about it before. Hero turned on Quack at the 2005 Tag World Grand Prix, carried him to the finals of that tournament. It finally seemed like Quack would get his independent tournament win after, failing so many times. But ultimately, Hero would pull the rug out from underneath him, turn on him, and start the Kings of Wrestling with Cannon and Claudio. Quack would rely on one of his top pupils in Jigsaw with a rotating cast of partners, and it would lead to this match where we would see the return of Reckless Youth, Tom Carter, one of the original founders of CHIKARA, along with Mike Quackenbush back in 2002, someone that had stepped away from pro wrestling for a little bit. Reckless Youth is a really interesting story if we want to talk about him for a second. Him, along with guys like Mike Quackenbush, Ace Darling, Twiggy Ramirez, I could go on for quite a bit, were wrestlers that I would read about in, Pro Wrestling Illustrated and magazines of that nature, back in the mid to late 90s, finding out about this wonderful world of independent wrestling before I really had any access to it myself. I'd been to a couple indie shows, in my hometown of Hamilton, Ontario, Canada at the time. But, indie wrestling wasn't like it is now where, every city seemingly has multiple independent promotions. But I would read about these guys and I was so intrigued by them that there was this like underground, bunch of wrestlers that I hadn't seen on TV, but that were having, matches and winning titles and doing all of these really, really cool things. And Reckless Youth was one of those guys. So when I, got into independent wrestling, he wasn't involved. Like I said, he wrestled, on those early CHIKARA shows, and then he took a break. Then in 2003, we started to see him pop up again, was the technician Tom Carter. He would have, stints in Ring of Honor. He would end up back in CZW for a little bit, and then he took a break. Then he came back in 2005 for this short CHIKARA run. Then he took a break, and aside from popping up, at the most random little indie shows from time to time, we wouldn't really see him in action again, and it's a damn shame because he's such a good wrestler. And in this match especially, being, out of the spotlight for a couple of years, he comes in and he hasn't lost a step whatsoever. He was one of those wrestlers, like a Quack, like a American Dragon Bryan Danielson, like a Low Key, those guys that, idolized a lot of the same pro wrestlers that I did, the WCW cruiserweights and guys like Owen Hart and Bret Hart and, Benoit and Eddie and Dean Malenko and a lot of those Japanese wrestlers and, Sean Waltman and Jerry Lynn, and guys like that, that were smaller wrestlers. And it's funny because I'm a really big dude. I'm 6'4", but I always, kind of gravitated towards those smaller underdog wrestlers too, as opposed to the big guys. So you have these undersized wrestlers on the independents, like these guys that, were patterning themselves after these undersized guys that have made it, and they were just doing wrestling that was light years beyond, all of the other guys out there. There were wrestlers on the independents that, wanted to be Hulk Hogan and wanted to be Stone Cold Steve Austin, and, you had these guys that wanted to be Owen Hart instead, just blowing minds with what they were able to do. And Tom Carter was one of those guys, and he's someone that, I think it's funny. I posted on Twitter, on my personal Twitter account, maybe a year or so ago, like who were your independent wrestlers that you thought, would become big stars and then just never did? And somebody said Reckless Youth, and I remember at the time being like, man, like Reckless is a legend though. But then when I really started to think about it, he's a perfect answer for that question. He's someone that, I think, old timers like myself, we remember Reckless Youth and we know what an influence he had, on a lot of guys during the indie boom period. But that's sort of been lost to time. You have guys now that are starting that idolize, the Will Ospreays and the Kota Ibushis, and there's nothing wrong with that. Don't get me wrong, but we're now a couple generations back from guys that idolized a dude like Reckless Youth, and he never got that mainstream television exposure. So he's a really good answer to that. Guys that maybe should have made it that didn't. But here, it was really, really exciting. He made this return to CHIKARA. We didn't know, that if that was only going to be a couple matches like it ended up being, or if it would be a long-term return. But God, he's so good in this match. And just getting to see him mix it up with dudes that clearly idolized him, like Chris Hero, like Eric Cannon. Claudio was from Europe, so I mean, who knows? But definitely, like when he came over to the States, I'm sure all of the guys that he stayed and trained with, like Quack and like Hero, we're pumping him full of Reckless Youth footage and stories. So really, really cool that they got to mix it up with him as well. The opening, early goings of this match, it's, we get all of these sequences, and the Technicos, they dominate and they out-wrestle all of the heels, and they get all of these triple teams on Eric Cannon. It's really, really good stuff, until, the heels eventually take over, which is going to happen in a match like this. But I love how they did it. There's a point where, Jigsaw gets all of this quick, offense, and he's out quicking all of the Rudos, and he kind of goes to get like Bandera to the apron, and he gets like caught up in the ropes. And whether that was a botch or intentional, I don't know. But the heels used that as like their turning point. And it just feels so natural that this is a mistake that was made, and that was the opportunity that the heels needed to pounce on. And just, if you're gonna mess up a spot in wrestling, it happens, right? Botches are real, they happen, and I've talked about this before, a lot of times, inexperienced wrestlers, or even sometimes experienced wrestlers that are so used to like scripting and having their matches laid out, they panic when they mess something up, and sometimes they'll repeat the spot, which is terrible. But use that organically, right? Like, you got to think about it in a real fight. In a real fight, you're going to miss a punch, slip a little bit, and someone's going to pounce on you, right? So why not use that in wrestling? Not everything has to be absolutely perfect. You can take those mistakes, and if you make it make sense and add to the story of your match, it could actually make your match even better than it would have been if things went, completely according to plan. But, I digress a little bit there. A good portion of this match, though, was just its heat on Jigsaw. Jigsaw plays a really, really good, face in peril. The heels are constantly going after his mask in this match. They start to plant, little cracks in the foundation of the Kings of Wrestling stable where, Hero is really bossing around Eric Cannon, and ultimately it would lead to Cannon being excommunicated from the group and Fist being brought in and everything like that. Jigsaw is really, really good at just trying to scrap and claw and fight from underneath, but just getting hit, with big time offense. He takes like a wild Swiss death from Claudio. Claudio with that pop-up Euro, he would hit it so good, but Jigsaw is maybe one of the best people that he ever hit that on. He would just get so much hang time off of it. We get, these little like glimmers of hot tags. We get, a Reckless Youth hot tag where he does some, high flying and stuff, trying to show he still has it, but then they eventually, beat him down and get heat on him. We get, Mike Quackenbush who gets the hot tag, and same thing, he gets hit with a low blow and the heels take back over. It leads, to this point where finally, the baby faces are able to run wild, and there's a bunch of heel miscommunication spots, playing into that story that Cannon's maybe the weak link of the Kings of Wrestling, or even if he's not, that's how Hero perceives him to be. So it allows the baby faces to rally a little bit, and then we get big exchanges. Everything just completely breaks down. We get a tease of Tom Carter getting the Kondo clutch on, but he eats a glimmering Warlock to stop that. Jigsaw, almost gets knocked out. He eats a sickening, glimmering warlock Ricola bomb combo that Claudio and Cannon were using as their finisher. He gets locked in the Hangman's Clutch. Jigsaw had been KO'd, in the Hangman's Clutch before, and it looks like it's going to happen again. But Quack's able to dive in at the last moment before Jigsaw's arm gets dropped for the third time. We get, big dives from Quack and Reckless. Cannon, starts ripping at the mask of Jigsaw, kind of wasting time going for that insult because he feels that that's what Hero wants him to do. He goes for the Glimmering Warlock one more time. Jigsaw ducks it and hits a flash Gigantonic for 3. Again, that built-in story that Cannon cost his team the match. This is, I don't want to call this a random, trios match. It was, on an Aniversario weekend. It was Reckless's return to CHIKARA, so it was kind of a big deal. But in the grand scheme of things, it's largely forgotten about. There wasn't, a ton that came out of this match. It's maybe not, well known, but it is so good just from bell to bell. All the work in it is amazing. I remember loving it at the time and watching it now. It stands up as one of the best trios matches CHIKARA would ever have in a company that's known for their trios matches to the point that they have a whole tournament once a year for it. This is one of the best of all time, in my opinion, and a really true, under the radar hidden gem that's just an absolute joy to watch. And again, if you're someone that's not familiar with Reckless Youth, this match is a great starting point. And then go back and watch, the old Jersey All-Pro and the old, Jersey Championship Wrestling and old CZW and, ECWA and everywhere that, Reckless used to work in the late 90s, early 2000s, and really, get a sense for just how influential he was, doing so much of that Japanese junior heavyweight style wrestling, that just we lacked exposure to, and really setting the tone for what would be the independent wrestling boom in the early 2000s. You can watch this match, of course, though, on independentwrestling.tv. Subscribe to my channel here on YouTube so that you never miss a video. Follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Wrestling50. And please join me again next time as we continue to count down Pro Wrestling's Top 50.